And here I thought the next archetype analysis was going to be either a GX era archetype or a Reigns era archetype, but nope. I was happily intercepted by Logan Davis, who has suggested that I stick with the 5Ds era, so some more, as he requested that I do Nordics. Yeah, I did plan on reviewing these, but in about 2 weeks. Well, in exactly 2 weeks from now, but yeah. It's a slightly bigger archetype, so I pushed it to the side for a bit. But anyway, Nordics were used by Team Ragnarok, and each one of the team members, that being Harald, Brave, and Dragon, each used one of the Nordic sub-archetypes that the archetype is divided into, those being Nordic Beasts, Nordic ALFARs, and Nordic Ascendants. And yeah, we'll be looking at them all at once, not sub-archetype by sub-archetype, and the reason why Nordics were also suggested to be reviewed today is because it's Logan Davis's birthday. Happy 15th birthday, man, and I took up the honor of being a proper senpai and to grant your birthday wish, so here, let's hope this archetype is as good as you think it is, and as good as you actually want it to be. It's somewhere in the middle, but let's take a closer look. So, let's take a look at their first monster, DVERG of the Nordic ALFAR. This is a level 1 monster with 100 attack and 1000 defense, and after you normal summon this card, you can normal summon one Nordic monster during your main phase this turn, in addition to your normal summon or set. You gain this effect once per turn, and if this face-up card on the field is sent to the graveyard, you can target a Nordic relic card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. Okay, so we'll get to the second effect in a bit, but this one used to be kind of mediocre at best due to the fact that okay, so he does provide an archetypal double summon, which is actually very nice, but I feel like he's a missed opportunity because he's not a level 1 tuner, which I would actually really like, since level 1 is an immensely good level for a tuner. But the newest wave of Nordic support, which of course consists of only 2 cards, made this guy actually quite good and valuable in valid Nordic decks. So the double summon effect makes him a lot better in setting up a very specific combo, so I gotta give it some credit. Also, one thing I don't particularly like is that he's a warrior monster, and all of the Nordic ALFAR monsters are spellcasters and not warriors. So yeah, bit of a type discrepancy there, but hey, at least he's searchable by Rhoda if you want to pull off the combo, which we'll get to soon. And as for the second effect, Nordic relics mostly consist of trap cards, which again are not worth running. So you basically run this thing because of the first effect. Next up we have their first level 2, that being Mara of the Nordic ALFAR. It's a spellcaster with 1000 attack and 500 defense, and when this card is when using this card as synchro material, the other synchro materials must be 2 Nordic monsters in your hand. Okay, remember when I talked about Malefic Parallel Gear in my Malefic review way back when, which was even my 3rd ever archetype analysis? That was, yeah. Anyway, I complimented that effect because Malefic Parallel Gear's effect stated that that his other non-tuner materials must be one Malefic monster in your hand due to the way how the Malefics function, and not to mention that the levels of those Malefic monsters are very nice and coherent, so you can basically perform synchro summons of levels 10 to 12. Only levels 10 and 12 if we ignore Malefic Red Eyes, which is absolutely not worth running. However, there's another problem that arises when talking about this card. Basically, you can only use this thing as synchro material if you use 2 Nordic monsters in your hand along with it. Specifically 2. Not one, one from each like field and hand, not 2 on the field as well. You need to have specifically 2 Nordics in your hand. And of course this is meant to simplify the process of summoning one of their synchro monsters, which we'll get to later, since their synchro monsters require one requires an ALFAR tuner, while the other requires a Nordic Beast tuner, and the third one requires an Ascendant tuner. And all of them require 2 or more materials in order to be synchro summoned. And while this does sound on paper like a good effect, it most likely won't bring any relevant plays to the table, since it leaves you with a massive hand minus. There's an even worse one coming right up, that being the Valkyrie of the Nordic Ascendant, our first Nordic Ascendant monster. And this card is not treated as a Valkyrie card for very obvious reasons. This was a recent reprint, so yeah. Anyway, when this card is a normal summoned, if your opponent controls a monster and you control no other cards, you can banish 2 Nordic monsters from your hand to special summon 2 FENRIR tokens, which are Warrior Earth level 4 with 1000 attack and defense in defense position. And literally the exact same thing here applies as with Mara. It's a level 2 that spawns 2 level 4 tokens, which, well, yeah, all of their synchro monsters are level 10, so it does make sense. However, this one leaves you with an even bigger hand minus, since you need 2 Nordic monsters to be banished in order for this card to do anything, and not to mention that you must not control any other cards in order to actively apply this effect, and your opponent needs to of course control a monster, which is not that hard to set up since this is the modern Yu-Gi-Oh! We're talking about. Needless to say, this card can't even be used as a comeback option, because if you actually draw into this and you have no other cards in your hand, or you don't have any Nordic monsters in your hand, well, you can't do anything. If it actually employed the effect of like banishing from the graveyard as well, as opposed to only working with the hand, I would have called it mildly okay at best. But as it is right now, it's not worth running. There's a way better Ascendant tuner coming right up. And now, sticking with the Ascendants, we have their semi-final Ascendant card, which is MIMIR of the Nordic Ascendant. Once per turn, at the start of your standby phase, if you control a Nordic monster and this card is in your graveyard, you can send a spell card from your hand to the graveyard to special summon this card. Back in the day, this didn't really amount to much, since this thing is not even a tuner, of course. But the fact of the matter is, since we live in since we live in an era where link monsters are much more prevalent, this guy is a bit more valuable. But the fact of the matter is that none of the Nordic spell cards are even worth running. Yeah, you can discard any other spell card, but literally none of them have decent graveyard effects unless you're using, like, I don't know, Metal Foes Fusion or the Witchcrafter spell cards, which of course do not combo well with Nordics, since ALFARs are the only spellcasters they have in the archetype, and ALFARs are by far the worst branch of the archetype. So if you crave an old guy who special summons stuff by discarding spell cards, then just run Summoner Monk instead. Next up, we segue into the Nordic Beasts, and we'll take a look at all of them due to their levels. First of which we have GUNGNIR of the Nordic Beasts, which is a level 3 with 1200 attack and 800 defense, and if this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, special summon 2 Nordic Beast tokens, which are Beast Earth level 3 with 0 attack and defense monsters. And getting 3 tokens in a synchro focus archetype is always a good idea, but you can clearly see that this is a lesser version of Dandelion, who spawned 2 tokens when hitting the graveyard in any conceivable way, while this card needs to be destroyed by battle in order to do stuff. But hey, more swarming, I guess. So I guess it couldn't hurt if you decide to run it, since the synergy with Nordic Beast is quite good actually, and Nordic Beasts are actually the best branch of this archetype. And he's worth running along with the next monster, which is GUNGNIR of the Nordic Beasts. When a monster you control is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. Once per turn, when this defense position card on the field is changed to face-up attack position, you can special summon a Nordic Beast monster from your deck in defense position, except GUNGNIR of the Nordic Beasts. it kind of hurts me that you cannot summon another copy of this thing, because I would have called it fantastic, because this is the only monster in the archetype, if you can believe it, that can actually special summon from the deck. And yeah, it's limited to Nordic beast monsters, which is kind of understandable due to the fact how Nordic beasts are very well meant to synergize with each other, and along with Tangrisnir, he was seen as in some niche Phantom Knights builds, which focused on rank 3 plays, of course. So yeah, and now let's move on to their level 4 monsters, first of which we have Garmor of the Nordic Beasts. If this card battles a level 4 or lower monster, after damage calculation you can return that monster to the hand. Not sure what this effect was supposed to synergize with, because it certainly ain't Nordics. Level 4 or lower monsters are not going to be active during your opponent's battle phase in order for this thing to go off. And they're sure as hell ain't going to be attacking into this thing, since this thing also won't survive getting into the opponent's battle phase, so don't run it. Next up we have the final Nordic Beast monster, which is also their only tuner, if you can believe it, GULDFAXE of the Nordic Beasts. If your opponent controls a synchro monster and you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. Well, it is a pretty format dependent card, but you basically run it because, well, you need to it's the only Nordic Beast tuner and you need it to summon a certain synchro monster, even though it's highly debatable whether you should really do that, because there's one tuner in the archetype that allows you to summon two of the synchro monsters which require Nordic Beasts and Nordic ALFARs as materials without using Nordic Beasts and ALFARs as materials, so run by preference if you really crave this summoning condition. Next up we have Tier of the Nordic Champions, which is basically a free agent kind of card, since he works with every single archetype, sub-archetype of this archetype, well, yeah. Anyway, your opponent's monsters cannot target Nordic monsters for attacks except Tier of the Nordic Champions, and if there are no other Nordic monsters on the field, you destroy this card. Just not worth it. This is beyond horrible even for the time period it came out, since of course it blows itself up for some reason if there are no Nordic monsters on the field. Its 2000 attack is sort of decent. I would have tolerated this a bit more if he actually protected from targeting as well, but not in the form it is right now. And also a sad little thing to note, if you control two of them, you do not prevent the opponent from attacking at all, since the opponent simply has a choice of which tier to attack instead. Don't run this. Next up we have Vanadis of the Nordic Ascendant, and this is the last Nordic Ascendant monster, and they certainly go out with a bang. For a synchro summon, you can substitute this card for any one Nordic tuner monster. If this card is used as a synchro material, all other synchro materials must be Nordic monsters. And once per turn, you can send one Nordic monster from your deck or to the graveyard. This card's level becomes the level of that monster until the end of this turn. Always run 3 and never any less. The fact that this thing is supposed to support all the 3 Nordic sub-archetypes is simply magnificent, since it allows you to summon 2 of their synchro monsters, well, basically, with using this card as material, and it's basically the only tuner monster worth running because of that. And not to mention, with its level manipulation effect, which is highly appreciated on a tuner monster, it offers some graveyard setup on top of that. So yeah, run 3, never any less. Let's move on. Next up we move on to the last bit of ALFARs, first of which we have Ljosalf of the Nordic ALFAR. It's a level 4, and when this card is normal summoned, you can target a face-up monster you control except this card. Special summon one Nordic monster from your hand with a level less than or equal to that face-up monster's level. Now, if this card made absolutely any sense, the effect would be absolutely to act as an archetypal Goblinberg, as it would allow you to special summon a, I don't know, a Nordic monster from your hand of any level. simply because the most splashable Nordics are of level 5 or lower, and yeah, I say level 5 or lower even though they only have one level 5 monster as a whole, and we'll get to the higher ones soon, but you get what I mean. But as it is right now, it requires an additional monster in order to be on the field beside him. It also eats up your normal summon, so yeah, not worth it, don't run it. And next up we have ALVISS of the Nordic ALFAR, which is actually one of their newer pieces of support, and it really shows as soon as you read its first sentence. If this card is banished by the effect of a Nordic Link monster, you can send to the graveyard one Nordic monster you control and 2 Nordic monsters from your deck whose total levels equal 10, then special summon one Aesir monster from your extra deck, and if an Aesir monster in your possession is sent to your graveyard by your opponent's card, you can banish this card from your graveyard to special summon one Aesir monster from your extra deck with a different name from the cards in your graveyard. You can only use this effect once per turn. Yeah, this is obviously meant to turbo out their synchro monsters, which are the so-called Aesir monsters. And yeah, the Link monster will get to it soon, but they were specifically made for this one combo alone, which basically means an instant Aesir monster, which were basically very hard to summon before the arrival of this thing, so you basically play it because you have to, not necessarily because you'd want to. Run 3. Next up we have Svartalf of the Nordic ALFAR, and it's our first level 5 and only level 5 monster, and it's very underwhelming. First of all, when it's normal summoned, you can target a Nordic monster from in your graveyard and add it back to your hand. I'm not sure what this effect was meant to induce, but it doesn't provide any relevant results, so why did they make this? I would have tolerated this a bit more if it'll actually let you special summon the monster, or if the effect activated on form of any summon, which would have actually been lovely. But the fact that this card has to eat up your normal summon just for a simple recycling effect is completely asinine, and not to mention none of the main deck monsters have any hand trap effects either, so this effect makes little to no sense. Just don't run this. Vanadis is the best tuner monster, as I already stated, so that's all you need. And now for their 2 tribute monsters, first of which we have Jormungandr, the Nordic Serpent. Cannot be normal summoned or set, and if an Aesir monster is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field in defense position. If an Aesir monster is not on the field, destroy this card, and if this face-up defense position card you control is changed to face-up attack position, take 3000 damage. This effect can only be used once while this card is face-up on the field. Alright, so the second part of the effect obviously refers to the opponent while Jormungandr is in their own control. But why exactly would they want to switch this to attack position in order to take 3000 damage, which is an effect that only applies once while this card is on the field? And of course, if you need to control a high level synchro monster, which the deck can barely summon in order to apply this effect, something's missing. Well, hopefully Fenrir, the Nordic Wolf, can clear things up, since he's a level 10 with 4000 attack and defense, and cannot be normal summoned or set, and during your main phase 2, for some reason, if an Aesir monster is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field as well in defense position. And if an Aesir monster is not on the field, you blow this thing up, and at the start of your battle phase, change all defense position monster you control to face up attack position, and both players take battle damage from battles involving this card. Okay, so let me get this straight. You need to work your ass off to summon a level 10 synchro monster, which requires a specific tuner monster and at least 2 other materials. Then proceed to give the opponent 2 huge beat sticks, of which one of them can be even bigger than your synchro monster. And then wait until the opponent's battle phase to basically switch them to attack position, and then inflict 3000 damage with Jormungandr, which is a decent chunk of burn damage, but the amount of setup it requires, and the fact that you need to go at least -5 in order to set it up, makes me cringe with indifference. If I didn't made myself clear right here, you basically don't run this and you basically walk away and never look back at it. And I'm really sad that Fenrir's effect is so horrendously awful, because he actually has one of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh artworks of all time. So yeah, this guy definitely needs a retrain in my book. Alright, now these Aesir monsters have been mentioned for quite a while, so let's take a look at them, shall we? First we have THOR, Lord of the Aesir, which is a level 10 synchro monster with 3500 attack and 2800 defense. It's a beast warrior monster for some reason. And it requires a Nordic beast tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters. Once per turn you can negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls until the end of this turn. And once per turn during the end phase, if this face-up card you controlled was destroyed by your opponent's card and sent to the graveyard this turn, you can banish one Nordic Beast Tuner from your graveyard to special summon this card, and if summoned this way, inflict 800 damage to your opponent. I would actually consider this to be among the better synchro monsters, simply because Nordic Beasts have the level of synergy, which makes this thing the easiest synchro monster to summon naturally. But when it comes to pure stats and attack power and of course the effect, I would call him the second best synchro monster. And the mass negation during your turn is okay-ish, but even though there are not too many monsters that are relevant at the moment whose effects you'd want to negate during your turn, probably some monsters which are like have heavy immunities to card effects and such, and the revival effect is meh. It requires you to banish Nordic Beast Tuner monster, of which means you can only bring this thing out this way 3 times before running out of resources, and considering that you barely even run GULDFAXE, since of course you're focusing your builds on Vanadis, it's very specific and not too good. Next up we have Loki, Lord of the Aesir. This one is a spellcaster with 3300 attack and 3000 defense. It's a bit of a more appropriate monster type, I gotta say. It requires a Nordic ALFAR tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters. And once per turn, when your opponent activates a spell or trap during your battle phase, quick effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Once per turn during the end phase, if this card you control was destroyed by an opponent's card, you can banish a Nordic ALFAR tuner, then special summon it. And its floating effect, well, its resummon effect, is that you get to add any trap card from your graveyard back into your hand. Arguably the worst Aesir boss monster, since the ALFARs are the worst branch of main deck monsters in the archetype, disregarding ALVISS of course. And not to mention that negating trap cards during your battle phase is peak 2007 and even slightly before, because nobody in their right mind uses battle traps nowadays, unless it's stuff like that gives you really hardcore advantage, such as Drowning Mirror Force or the Black Whirl, not the Black Whirl, in the Blackwing trap that actually banishes all stuff you control, stuff like that. But yeah, and also recycling trap cards from your graveyard is neat, even though there are like less than 5 decent targets for this thing to pick back up, some of which include like Impermanence, Evenly Matched, or any other trap card which has the ability to activate itself from the hand. But yeah, you get what I mean. So yeah, Loki is not worth running, sadly. And as for their final Aesir monster, we have Odin, Father of the Aesir, which is a level 10, and once again a fairy this time. Again, who thought these? The only one who actually is decent fit is Loki, and yeah. Anyway, this one requires a Nordic Ascendant tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters. And once per turn you can make this card unaffected by spell or trap cards until the end of this turn. Once per turn during the end phase, if this card was destroyed by an opponent's card, you can banish a Nordic Ascendant tuner from your graveyard to special summon this card from your graveyard, and if summoned this way, you get to draw one card. And obviously this is the best of the bunch, simply because it requires a Nordic Ascendant tuner, meaning Vanadis. And the revival effect is one of the only ways this deck can actually go plussing, if it actually goes off. And also the immunity effect is very good, since it makes it basically immune to 2/3 of the card in the game, but that still leaves monster effects, which are still most prevalent, which can easily take care of this thing. And not to mention that the immunity itself is not a quick effect, meaning if you don't activate it on the turn at the moment when it's summoned, you can lose it to stuff like Bottomless Trap Hole, Solemn Judgment, Solemn Warning, Solemn Strike, basically anything that can negate summon, which are basically 99% of the modern trap cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! So yeah, it's worth running mainly because of the next monster in ALVISS, and that next monster is Gulvieg of the Nordic Ascendant. This is a Link 1 monster, which requires a level 5 or lower Nordic monster, has 800 attack points bottom left. And if this card is Link summoned, you can banish up to 3 cards from your hand and or field, and if you do, special summon that many Nordic monsters from your deck in defense position. Also, for the rest of this turn, you cannot special summon monsters except Aesir monsters, nor you can normal summon or set any monsters. You can only use this effect of Gulvieg of the Nordic Ascendant once per turn. Once per turn, while this card points to an Aesir monster, your opponent cannot target that monster with card effects. Also, your opponent controls cannot target this card for attacks with his monsters. And as you can probably see right through this effect, if you banish all this, you basically can summon an instant Aesir Synchro monster, which basically turns DVERG into an Aesir button, since basically DVERG can go use normal summon DVERG, you go into Gulvieg, and then you get to normal summon ALVISS, and then you first normal summon ALVISS, and then with DVERG you go into Gulvieg, you banish ALVISS, and then special summon a bunch of stuff, which of course includes the Aesir Synchro monsters. And not to mention, if you don't even have ALVISS available, you can special summon a bunch of stuff which can basically make an instant level 10 Synchro. And it must be a Nordic monster, because of course this is an archetype from the 5Ds era, and this ridiculous amount of field presence in a card released so much after the first wave of support basically needs to have a restriction like this, because goddamn, this effect is such a horrendously good field generator. Anyway, you play 3 ALVISS and 3 of these in Nordic builds, because, well, there are this is the most relevant way to summon their synchro monsters, and make sure you actually protect them from kaiju removal, because they're very prone to that if summoned this way. Alright, now moving on to their back row. I'm almost half an hour in, and we still have the back row to talk about. First of which we have the field spell Nordic Lights. Nordic monsters on the field cannot be destroyed by battle, and if this card on the field is destroyed, destroy all Nordic monsters on the field. Well, this card kind of goes against the logic of several cards in the archetype, including Tungrisnir's floating effect, then the floating effect of DVERG, if you even want to run the Nordic relics for some reason, the Aesir Synchro monsters. Oh well, the Aesir Synchro monsters are actually immune to this, but hey, beggars can't really be choosers. But yeah, this is a field spell from the Synchro era, if I ever saw one, so you basically don't run it. Next up we have March Towards Ragnarok. It allows you to target an Aesir monster you control, and until the end of this turn, its effects are negated. Also, that face-up monster is unaffected by the effects of other spells and traps. Essentially, for negating its effect, you give any of the Aesir monsters the ODIN'S effect, and it's probably the best way to actually trigger ODIN'S immunity effect when you summon him. But this thing is still very, very risky to consider running, due to the fact that Aesir monsters do not tend to hit the field as often as you'd like, even with the existence of ALVISS and Gulvieg. So yeah, if you really feel like it, run one. Next up we have Gotterdammerung. Okay, so This one is quite something. Let's just read it out. Target one Aesir monster you control. Give control of that monster to your opponent, and during your opponent's next end phase, destroy that monster, and if you do, banish all cards your opponent controls. Okay, so the effect is actually pretty busted if you manage to pull it off. It's essentially the anime effect of the Archetype, the Chaos Phantom from GX, and the effect of the new retrain, which we received in the new Archetype rematch, which you can check out after you watch this video. So, yeah, but the fact of the matter is, there are only two monsters which you can give to your opponent to actually activate this effect, and those are Thor and Loki, of course. Because if you actually give him Odin, like it's depicted in the picture, the opponent can actually make Odin immune to spells and traps, which will of course prevent this thing from activating, and then you'll just lose the monster, and the opponent will have permanent control over Odin, which is of course the best monster since he can make himself immune to 2/3 of the cards in the game. So if you for some reason have a build exclusively around this thing by employing Thor and Loki, run one if you want to make yourself a ridiculously stupid fun challenge. And if you're into the competitive scene, I just say ignore this one. And the final spell card is the equipped Nordic Relic Draupnir. This is the only spell card that is a Nordic Relic, and it can be equipped to an Aesir or Nordic monster. It gains 800 attack, and if this face-up card on the field would be destroyed by a card effect, you can add a Nordic Relic card from your deck to your hand. It searches out all the other Nordic relics, including additional copies of itself. All the others are trap cards, which are not worth running, so neither is this. And the stat boost is mostly irrelevant, so yeah. Alright, let's check out the other Nordic relics, shall we? First of which we have Nordic Relic Brisingamen. This one allows you to target a face-up monster you control and target one face-up monster your opponent controls. The attack of the first target becomes equal to their original attack of the second target until the end of this turn. Well, it applies to any monster. I guess that's the only good thing to consider about this card. But if you really want an effect like this, I just prefer Mirror Mail over this, because this one only affects grants you the original attack, while Mirror Mail mirrors the current attack, and this one lasts until the end phase, while Mirror Mail does not, as Mirror Mail is actually permanent. So yeah, Mirror Mail you run, while this you don't. Next up we have Nordic Relic Megingjord. Target one Aesir or Nordic monster you control, its attack and defense become double its original attack and defense until the end of this turn, but it cannot attack your opponent directly this turn. This can provide some decent power output, but the fact of the matter is, Nordic monsters from the main deck rarely ever see the light of day until your opponent's battle phase, or your own battle phase, as of the fact of the matter is, due to the fact that you're using them as material for some bigger monsters. And the Aesir monsters rarely ever have to double their attacks, since their attacks are very massive enough as they are, and not to mention this is a trap card, which makes it slow by nature. So. But I will give it the points for being arguably the best Nordic Relic card, so run one if you feel like it. Next up we have Nordic Relic GUNGNIR. This allows you to banish one Aesir or Nordic monster you control, then target one card on the field and destroy it, and also during your second end phase after the activation, return the monster you banished to activate this card on the field to face up attack position. As slow as it is the only archetypal way to basically offer the deck some spot removal, as obnoxiously specific and slow again as I said it is. It works both on Aesir or Nordics, and you can basically banish a lower level monster to basically offer some spot removal, but again, it's a trap card and it's very slow. Not the GUNGNIR I'd like to see in this deck. Next up we have Nordic Relic Leivaten, and this is the last Nordic Relic monster. trap, sorry. And target one face-up monster on the field, destroy the monster by battle this turn, destroy it. Cards and the effects cannot be activated in response to this card's activation. And obviously this was meant to use on the opponent's monster, since this is basically a defensive tool. You basically, during your opponent's battle phase, if something got destroyed by battle, you spring this and that monster is destroyed. But if you really crave an effect like this, you're better off just running Man-Eater Bug instead. So yeah. And I don't know why they added the effect of that you cannot chain something to it, but I guess it makes this card slightly better, I guess. Next up we have Divine Relic Mjolnir. It allows you to target an Aesir monster you control, and it can make a second attack during each battle phase this turn. Pretty neat if we absolutely ignore the fact that only Aesir monsters can use this. Because if you pair it up with Odin, you basically swing for 8,000 damage, which is always really impressive. But given the fact that Gulvi and ALVISS exists, so I guess running one couldn't hurt, as this thing combined with Odin can actually make for a quick OTK, so run it if you feel like it, but only at one. And next up we have GLUTNIR, the Fetters of Fenrir. Add one Nordic monster from your deck to your hand. Now this is usually the part where I say that you usually run 3 of these at all times and never any less. And I would say that if it was a spell card and not a trap card. Who thought this was a good idea to make this into a trap card? Because yes, this actually is a trap card in the anime as well. And in fact in the anime it's even worse, since you need to control an Aesir monster in order to activate it. But yeah, I can't imagine what would happen if you like start off the duel and you brick and draw 3 of these, and you literally have to wait until your opponent's turn is over in order to start making plays. So yeah, but still, this is a 3-off staple because there are simply no better search options. So you basically run it out of obligation and not out of personal choice. Next up we have Odin's Eye, which is our first continuous trap, and once per turn during each player's standby phase, you can target an Aesir monster you control, negate its effects until the end of this turn, and if you do, look at all cards in your opponent's hand and all set cards they control, and your opponent cannot activate the cards or effects in response to this card's activation. Okay, the only valuable part is the fact that you get to look at your opponent's hand, but there are other cards that do the same thing while doing something else, which of course are stuff like the 3 tactical talents, or stuff like any card which can mimic the Forceful Sentries effect, Spiritual Water Altaui. There are better cards that do much more than just look at something in your hand, and not to mention that you also need to use an Aesir monster and also negate its effects in order to actually perform a simple ancient telescope-ish effect, so not worth running. Next up we have Solemn Authority, and you are probably wondering why I didn't show this off during my Solemn archetype review. Well, I didn't because this is actually a Nordic support card. You activate it by targeting an Aesir monster you control. It cannot be targeted by other card effects while this card is on the field, and it is sent to the graveyard during your second standby phase after activation. And you just don't run this because Gulvi exists. The end. You just no. Don't run this at all. Gulvi exists along with ALVISS, so not recommended. Next up we have the last card of the Nordic archetype, the Golden Apples. Yeah, this one only is the part of the archetype due to its lore. When you take battle damage while you control no monsters, gain life points equal to the damage you took, and if you do, special summon one Malus token, which is a Fiend Dark level and one with undetermined attack and defense, and its attack and defense are each equal to the amount of life points you gained by this effect. Remember Gimmick Box from from Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, which is an anime-only support card for Gimmick Puppets? Well, this is essentially the Nordic version of that, as it can provide a level 1 monster with quite beefy attack values if you actually survive the turn that you get attacked directly while if you want to activate this effect. So it's essentially a win more card if you're feeling a bit ballsy and want to show off. So if you were aiming for that purpose, then I guess running one couldn't hurt. And now it's time for the grades. In terms of consistency, well, GLUGNIR is as far as it goes to archetypal consistency, and that's a bit sad, so that's a complete 1 out of 3 here, so yeah. In terms of power, the Aesir monsters are the only consistent source of power output, and back in the day they were way too difficult to summon, and they even are even to this day by traditional means, but GULDFAXE makes them a cinch to summon if you actually open up well enough to actually support them even further, to not just be kaiju bait for your opponent to curb stomp, or to basically for the opponent to basically remove them by other means. So yeah, the potential is here, but it's very rarely if ever met, so I guess I'll be generous and give them a 2 out of 3 in terms of power output. Comeback ability purely depends on top decking stuff, which is completely unrelated to the archetype, and there's not enough of those, and GULDFAXE can make a decent board for you to at least start making your comebacks. So again, we're talking about a single monster, so not great, so 1 out of 3 here as well. Their protection ranges from GULDFAXE's effect over the Aesir monsters, and of course it only works on Aesir monsters and not on the main deck monsters. ODIN'S immunity is also as far as they go, and that's about it, so 1 out of 3 there. Now for the versatility, well, there's barely anything that they are splashable with, and not to mention that anything you splash in their core decks is not going to do that good of a work in order to bounce them to like tier 1 or anything, so it's 1 out of 3. These guys are basically waiting for some better main deck monsters in order to do anything, because as it is right now, their main deck monsters serve exclusively as a ticket to their extra deck monsters, which is a bit disappointing since, well, Nordic theming is actually one of my favorite theming in the game, and not to mention that the extra deck monsters are not what I would consider prime meta relevant material. So yeah. But in order to wrap this up, Logan, if this is what you wanted to hear, then alright, and if not, I'm sorry, but this is just how the archetype is. They really need some additional support other than GULDFAXE and ALVISS, which is kind of a must with an archetype as old as these, and it's even baffling to say that since these guys actually came out in the set which was actually themed after them, Storm over Ragnarok, and that is also the set which introduced one of the best 6 samurai support lineups in the game's history and turned them into one of the best decks of all time. So yeah, kind of curious and to know how mistakes like that are made. But anyway, I finished with Nordics, and next time we'll most likely be seeing the GX era archetype I said in the previous episode, or the Reigns era archetype that I mentioned in the previous episode. But until then, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos, walkthroughs, and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. As usual, I'll upload the next part whenever I can. Be sure to check out my Patreon when you got the time. Maybe drop a few donations if you feel like it. And once again, Logan, happy birthday to you, man. May all your best wishes come true. See you all and have a good day. Peace.